The wind howled over the English Channel in the autumn of 1066. On its misty horizon, sails pierced the gray skies, hundreds of Norman ships riding the waves, bringing with them knights, horses, and a claim to a kingdom. England was unaware that the world it knew was about to end. In these waves came a man who would become not just a king, but a myth: William, Duke of Normandy. For centuries, England had been ruled by kings of Saxon and Danish descent, warriors, saints, and diplomats whose legacies shaped the island. Yet, at the death of King Edward the Confessor, no clear heir stood strong. A powerful noble named Harold Godwinson rose to claim the throne. But across the sea, William of Normandy believed it was his birthright. He swore that Edward had promised it to him and that Harold had once pledged his loyalty. England in the mid-11th century was a vibrant, complex society. Villages prospered under a relatively stable monarchy, and the church had grown strong under Edward's rule. Yet beneath this surface stability lay rivalries, feuds, and regional tensions that had long plagued the Anglo-Saxon rule. The nobility, divided among ambitious URLs, could not have anticipated the storm that was gathering just across the Channel. William, though born of illegitimate blood, had clawed his way to the ducal throne in Normandy through violence and cunning. His court was one of iron discipline, religious devotion, and ruthless politics. When news of Harold's coronation reached him, he took it as a grave insult. This wasn't just politics, it was betrayal. William appealed to Pope Alexander II, framing his conquest as righteous. He was granted a holy banner. By the late summer of 1066, William's army was ready. Hundreds of ships, thousands of warriors, siege engines, and supplies were assembled on the Norman coast, but unfavorable winds delayed the crossing. Meanwhile, Harold had his own troubles. In the north, another claimant, Harold Hardrada of Norway, invaded, forcing Harold to march his army over 180 miles to Stamford Bridge. There, Harold achieved a crushing victory. Yet no sooner had he defeated the Norwegians than word came. The Normans had landed in the south. Harold and his men, exhausted and battle-worn, began another long march. On the 14th of October, 1066, the two armies met near Hastings. The battle began at first light. Harold's troops formed a shield wall on Senlac Hill, determined and proud. The Normans launched wave after wave of cavalry and archers against it. The Saxons held their ground. But as the hours passed, Norman tactics evolved. Feigned retreats lured parts of the English line into fatal mistakes. William himself was struck down and rumored dead until he famously raised his helmet to show he lived, rallying his men once more. As dusk approached, fate delivered its most cruel twist. An arrow, arcing through the sky, struck Harold in the eye. With Harold dead, the English line broke. The slaughter was total. Bodies littered the field. Saxon nobles were cut down, and the last true Anglo-Saxon king lay lifeless on the blood-soaked earth. William had won the crown by conquest, not inheritance. He would now be known as William the Conqueror, a name that would echo through the centuries as both a builder and destroyer. William's coronation on Christmas Day, 1066, was intended as a symbol of legitimacy, yet the moment was marked by terror. When the crowd inside Westminster Abbey shouted in approval, Norman guards outside thought a riot was beginning and set nearby houses ablaze. It was a fitting metaphor. This was a reign built on fire, fear, and absolute power. England was no longer English, it was Norman. To maintain control, William turned to the tools of domination. He built castle stone fortresses that towered above towns and farmland alike. These were not just military structures, they were symbols of submission. The Great Tower of London, begun shortly after his conquest, still stands today as a testament to Norman authority. In every region, Saxon lords were dispossessed and replaced by Norman barons. The old Anglo-Saxon elite was purged. Lands were confiscated and redistributed among Norman knights and clerics. Within a few years, only a handful of English nobles remained in power. The new aristocracy brought with them the French language, Romanesque architecture, and feudal governance. French became the tongue of court, law, and nobility, while English, once proud, was reduced to the language of peasants. But the transformation wasn't just political. William introduced the feudal system, centralizing power in a way unseen in Anglo-Saxon England. Land was granted in return for military service. Every man owed loyalty to the king through a chain of vassalage. This hierarchy reshaped English society for centuries. Even the church was reshaped. Anglo-Saxon bishops were replaced with loyal Normans. In 1085, William ordered a survey of his new kingdom. The Doomsday Book, every manor, field, pig, and person was recorded. It was an unprecedented administrative feat, part census, part audit, part threat. It let William know exactly what he controlled on, made sure his subjects knew he controlled everything. It was said that its records were as final as the Last Judgment. Resistance did not end with Hastings. In the north, rebellions broke out, including one led by Edgar Theling, the last legitimate Anglo-Saxon prince. In response, William unleashed the harrying of the Northa brutal scorched earth campaign. Villages were burned, crops were destroyed. Thousands died of famine and exposure. It was genocide by medieval standards. The North remained silent for generations. Despite the horror, Norman England began to stabilize. New cathedrals rose in Durham, Ely, and Canterbury. Monasteries flourished under Norman reforms. Trade increased, particularly with Normandy and the continent. England was no longer culturally isolated. It had been forcibly integrated into the wider European sphere. With new alliances came both wealth and war, particularly with France. The English language began to evolve. Old English fused with Norman French to become Middle English. This transformation added tens of thousands of new words, especially in law, art, war, and governance. Words like justice, counsel, court, treason, and honor all came from the Normans. Even the structure of English grammar shifted under this cultural collision. The cultural legacy of the Norman Conquest can still be felt today. The legal system, rooted in feudal obligations and royal authority, owes much to Norman principles. Parliament, royal councils, and the very monarchy bear the stamp of William's centralization. Even British surnames and heraldry trace their origins to the Conquest era. In many ways, modern England was born in 1066. William's descendants would shape the English throne for centuries. The Plantagenets, Tudors, and even today's royal family trace a direct line back to Normandy. The conquest set into motion centuries of conflict with France, from the Angevin Empire to the 100 Years' War. It also began the long debate over what it meant to be English. Yet, perhaps the most important change was psychological. England, once ruled by kings, chosen by noble consensus, was now ruled by right of conquest. Authority no longer flowed from the people or the church, came from the sword. That shift would ripple through the centuries, affecting revolutions, civil wars, and the very idea of national identity. The Norman Conquest also redefined kingship. No longer just a leader, the king became the embodiment of state power. William ruled, not with consent, but by command. His reign laid the groundwork for stronger monarchs, but also for future rebellions, including Magna Carta. In reshaping the monarchy, he planted seeds of both tyranny and liberty. Even today, you can see the impact of 1066 in every corner of Britain, from castle ruins to town names, from laws to language. The conquest's shadow looms large. It remains one of the few events in history where everything changed permanently. Before William, England was Anglo-Saxon. After him, it was something else entirely. The question of whether England gained or lost from the Norman Conquest still sparks debate. It brought order, yes, but at a horrific cost. Culture was erased. Lives were destroyed. And yet, from this violence emerged a stronger, more unified kingdom. That paradox is the legacy of 1066, both creation and destruction, unity through domination. As the centuries passed, the Normans ceased to be foreigners. Their blood mixed with the Saxons they conquered. Their language became English. Their architecture became heritage. What began as invasion ended in assimilation. But the memory of that conquest still resonates, staged into stone, written in law, and remembered in names. 1066 is not just a date in a textbook. It is the moment when the past died and a new future began. William the Conqueror died in 1087, but the kingdom he forged endured. His conquest became legend, his power became myth, and his shadow became part of what it means to be English. This is the story of a king who crossed the sea, took a crown, and changed a nation. A story of blood and belief, of swords and silence, of fire and foundation. The Norman Conquest was not just a war, it was a transformation, and it all began with a promise and ended with an arrow.